Hello, everybody, and welcome to my podcast. This is Suspects and Spirits, and I'm your host, Taylor Seraphin. Wow, that's really weird to say. I have a podcast. I finally did it. This little passion project has been in the works for months now, and I'm finally here recording my first episode. I mean, I did record last weekend, but then I thought I could do better, so I'm doing it again. But I got a cold last week and I'm still kind of fighting it off. So if I sound phlegmy, I'm truly sorry, but I need to record when I can. I'm a mom and a teacher, and life is hectic. So I record literally whenever I can find time. And right now is one of those times. This podcast will be pretty candid. Not a lot of editing happening right now. I promise I'll get better as time goes on. I don't really know what I'm doing. So this should be interesting. The podcast itself will be alternating stories of true crime and paranormal. I figure the paranormal can be kind of like a palate cleanser because true crime can be super heavy. And I mean, who doesn't like a good ghost story, anyways? I love them, obviously. It's why it's part of my podcast. I've been into this stuff, I mean, probably since I could speak. I don't know. I've always loved Halloween and spooky and strange phenomena and true crime. Just, it's always been a part of who I am. Since a very young age, I've been really interested in psychology and, yeah, just like how people think and why they do certain things. I read The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule in middle school, but don't tell my parents that. Uh, just kidding. They can't ground me. I'm 32 years old. Hi, mom and dad, if you're listening. I apologize in advance for the curse words that will inevitably be a part of this podcast. Cursing just kind of comes with the territory. We'll be diving into all kinds of crazy stories from cold cases to cryptids and everything in between. If you don't know what that means, neither do I. I'm just here telling the stories that I find fascinating. So, yeah, welcome. This is a safe space for all of us to be ourselves, all 10 of my listeners and I. If you're new here, don't worry, so am I. So, yeah, welcome to the True Crime Coven. Thank you for joining. Thanks for joining my coven. I do ask that if you end up liking the content, you go ahead and rate, review, subscribe, because that really does help podcasters and podcasts, get noticed. They get up there with all the reviews and rates and whatnot. You can also go follow the pod on Instagram. I'm working on getting other social media platforms set up and a website set up. But for now, Insta will be the go to for like episode updates and sneak peeks at what we'll be covering. And when I say we, I don't know why I said that. It's literally just me. I don't know why I said we. Now, I don't really know the best way to transition here into the story. So I'm just going to get started with telling you why I chose this as my first episode. So hopefully you read the title, The Phantom Killer of Sierra Vista. Now, unfortunately, this first case, it's it's quite a doozy and it's a rough one, you guys. I didn't even know how rough it was until I was way too deep into research to turn back. But I mean, I guess that's why we're all here, right? For whatever reason, we like to learn and listen about the worst of humanity, and that is very much prevalent in this story. I chose this as my first case because it happened in my hometown, not when I was alive, like way before. Somehow I never knew it. I never knew the story, and I was really shocked to have never heard it because holy shit, I mean, this is a this is quite a story. And when you think of serial killers, you think of like Gacy, Kemper, Dahmer, BTK, those people, they're notorious, they're infamous, but they probably don't come from your tiny hometown in Sierra Vista. So this case really threw me. Before I jump in, though, I do want to preface this and just say trigger warning, there's talk of animal cruelty, and the victims in this case are young children. So it's pretty rough. I want to place that trigger warning here for everybody at the beginning. Okay. So first, let's get into the history of the town and those involved. Oh, and my sources, because I don't want to get sued. Uh, Most of my sources for today's story came from the Arizona Family Investigates podcast for True Crime Arizona. It was The Phantom Killer, a limited series by Morgan Loew, and he did, oh my God, he did this case so much justice, and he He really dug deep. He did a deep dive into this. So thank you, Morgan Lowe, for your information in your podcast. I also used an article from the Arizona Daily Star, from CNN News, and from the Herald Review. So I'll go ahead and I'll link those in the show notes as well for you guys so that if you want to kind of look into this, you can do that yourself. So let's get started. This case takes place in my little hometown of Sierra Vista, Arizona. Sierra Vista is located in the southeastern part of the state. It's near the border with Mexico. It's kind of like a gateway to the Sonoran Desert and the Huachuca Mountains. It's really, really beautiful. It's known for its sunny climate and great weather, and it's a all around, attractive destination for like outdoor enthusiasts and snowbirds. They love to come here and enjoy the weather. The town has a really, really rich military history, primarily due to Fort Huachuca, which is the Army installation. It's actually the intelligence base for the Army. So we get people from all over in Sierra Vista. It's very culturally diverse for such a tiny town. In terms of amenities, Sierra Vista has very few things to offer. Anyone listening who grew up in Sierra Vista, you guys know. You know what I mean? There really isn't a whole lot for teens and youth to enjoy. Growing up there, I can confirm that we pretty much had to make our own fun. They did build a mall when I was young, and that was pretty cool, but, like, it became known as the hallway because that's all it was. And those stores are not thriving these days. It's the epitome of a small town. There's just not a lot to do. You just have to play outside and be home before the streetlights come on. At least that's how it was when we were growing up. And, yeah, kids just, they get into mischief, they make their own fun. So as you can imagine, when these crimes that occurred in my story took place, it was 1967. The town which it was see, I'm already misspeaking, sorry. I don't even know if I'm gonna edit that out, we'll see. The town was much more rural, and it had a population of only 5,000 people. So, at the time, really tiny, and it had a beautiful sense of, like, innocence and friendliness that most small towns tend to have. You couldn't go to the store without running into multiple people you knew. Still true to this day, but much harder to not do then. People trusted their neighbors. They didn't lock their doors. Kids could just roam free and be kids back then. No one thought anything of it. It was the 60s and kids just kind of ran amok, you know? That is until Sunday, April 30th, 1967, when the small town of Sierra Vista, Arizona experienced a devastating crime that would forever change the lives of two innocent families. On this day, a little girl named Cindy Cleland, she was 7 years old. She was out front with her sister at their home in Sierra Vista. And Cindy's older sister, Darlene, had decided she wanted to go get her bike, which she had left elsewhere. Cindy asked to tag along, and Darlene was like, "No, I don't want you to tag along. I'm the big sister and I'm too cool." So she said no. And she took off to get her bike. And Cindy, she was just probably looking for something to do. As the youngest in the family myself with two older sisters, I can confirm that we really just wanted to tag along and be involved. So I understand why Cindy would want to go with her sister, even if it was just to get her bike. Now, after Darlene had left, Cindy also decided to leave. She ran out of the house, and her mother called after her, but she either didn't listen or didn't hear her mother. I tried to find a little more information about Cindy herself, just as a person, but I couldn't find a whole lot that didn't have to do with the case. So there wasn't a whole lot of information I could gather, but what I could find is that she seemed like a typical rambunctious little girl, typical 7-year-old who just enjoyed being outside and being a kid. The family assumed that when Cindy ran off, she probably went to collect empty soda bottles. This was really common back then for kids to do, and Cindy would do this a lot to earn money for candy. So no one thought anything of this. It was a small town, it was a safe town, a military town at that. So kids just, they roamed free without a worry in the world. It was truly a different time. However, when evening rolled around and Cindy had not come home yet, her mother became slightly concerned. Now, This was pretty typical for the time. They weren't helicopter parents like we are now, but her mom she was still a little worried. I mean, that's her daughter, that's her baby girl, and she doesn't know where she is. They also had no way of going to search for her. They didn't have a car and, there weren't any cell phones to just like call up Cindy or their friends to see if they'd seen her. And they only had a landline they could use. But nonetheless, her mother figured she'll be home and it'll be fine. But as evening turned to night and still no sign of Cindy, panic began to set in and her mother reported her missing. Cindy was actually one of 3 girls to have been reported missing that weekend. And unfortunately, Cindy was the only one who did not return in the morning. So the Sierra Vista Police Department at the time was only about 10 officers. They began a search party for Cindy. Several hundred people were actually involved in looking for her. Like I said, this is a small town. So when something happens, everyone knows about it and everyone pitches in. And that's definitely one thing I did love about growing up in a small town. If you needed something, someone was always there to help. So the military also joined in on this search because they're a big part of the community. So having the military help you would have been ideal, right? And her sister Darlene at the time was just kind of expecting her sister to be in trouble when she returned home. The thought of her having been abducted or hurt in some way had not even crossed her mind. I don't think it crossed anybody's mind, really. But 3 days had gone by and there was still no sign of Cindy. Search efforts were not pulling up anything, and everyone was in a panic. It wasn't like her and was definitely not common for a 7-year-old in the 60s. I mean, they didn't just disappear for days at a time. They did run off, but they always came home. Now, on Monday, May 1st, mid afternoon, the sheriff's deputies were searching Fort Huachuca's East Range, and they found 2 hair barrettes on the desert floor. One of the barrettes was blue and one was red. These were the same color barrettes Cindy's mother had reported her wearing in her hair the day she went missing. At 5 p.m., a sheriff's posse member, which, from what I gathered, a sheriff's posse member was like a volunteer sheriff, they found a child's shirt, shorts, and underwear near the barrettes hanging on mesquite branches scattered over an area around 300 yards. At this point, people came to a very gruesome conclusion. They figured they should be looking for a body and not necessarily a little girl just out wandering and lost. So Cindy's sister recalls officers coming to their home and showing her mother the barrettes and clothing, and her mom just absolutely broke down. Through her tears, she confirmed those were Cindy's. And that's when the morbid reality set in. More people joined the search, and it wasn't until 3 days after the searches began that they finally found little Cindy's body. At 10:25 a.m., 3 days after they started searching, they found her about 120 feet north of the fence that separates Sierra Vista from the Fort Huachuca East Range. And that's not far from where her clothing had been found. Now, this next part, it's very graphic. I apologize. It is part of the story, but if you're squeamish or sensitive to these things, you may want to fast forward a bit. Cindy's body had been found naked, cut open, and disemboweled. Her head had been bashed in with a rock. I know, I don't like what kind of soulless monster does that to anyone, but especially a child? Everyone was absolutely shocked. Some of the most experienced on the Sierra Vista Police Department were just beside themselves. How are they going to break this to the family? How can you ever deliver that news? It's just terrible. It was traumatizing for everybody involved. Finding a child like that, I mean, those officers, I don't know if they got therapy or anything. Probably not. I mean, it was the 60s, but ugh, terrible for everybody. So they had to contact her family. Cindy's father, Sergeant William Cleland, had actually been in Vietnam and was recovering from a non combat injury in Japan. when the Red Cross contacted him and arranged for him to come home. Unfortunately, he had just arrived in Sierra Vista when search efforts finally found young Cindy's body. Her father was given the awful task of identifying his daughter. Now, according to her sister Darlene, Cindy was her father's favorite, and she was really worried at this time that she would get in trouble for not allowing her little sister to go with her that day. Ultimately, you know, if she thought, if I had just let Cindy come with me, she wouldn't have gotten hurt, right? She wouldn't have gotten killed, which I think is totally understandable. But at the same time, big sisters always kick their little sisters out of their endeavors. That's just what they do. And of course, this wasn't her fault. It was the fault of the killer. Kids should be able to play outside, go get their bikes, collect soda bottles without a worry in the world. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. But nonetheless, 12-year-old Darlene, I mean, she was only 12. She felt fully responsible. And to this day, it haunts her. So she was very worried when her father came back to town that now she was going to be in trouble. And on top of all that, she's heartbroken about what happened to her sister. So Sergeant Clellan, Cindy's father, he identified the body, and within days, this part really kind of threw me. Within days, he was back in Vietnam. Just like had to come, identify his daughter's body, and then back to Vietnam for you. So crazy. And after that, multiple law enforcement officers were doing everything they could to solve this case. But aside from the rock with Cindy's blood on it, there was no further DNA to help point the officials in the right direction. Thankfully, they'd found something they thought was even better. They found an eyewitness. So, I mean, okay, these days we know an eyewitness testimony, it's not always accurate, but this was all they had to go off of. And when you have nothing, you go with whatever something is presented to you. So during the search for Cindy, during those days that they were looking for her, one of Cindy's friends who lived just a few doors down told the police that she saw Cindy getting into a black sedan with an older gentleman. She said it was an elderly gentleman with gray hair. The little girl said, quote, "The man looked mean. He told Cindy to get in the car, and Cindy did so because she thought he was friendly. When Cindy got into the car, the man drove off. I told her to get out of the car because he was a kidnapper. She told me she couldn't get out because the door was locked." End quote. So this little girl described the man as white male with a brown shirt and white slacks. He had white hair and wore a hat, and of course this description went out and was printed in every single paper. And in a small town like Sierra Vista, everyone knows everyone. So they were sure this would help the case and bring the killer to justice. Now, it is very important to keep in mind this was a very vague description and one coming from a child. But again, I mean, that's all they had at the time. Now, when I listened to what the little girl said, immediately I think that was a little odd, right? She had a full conversation with her friend as she's being kidnapped. Usually that's just like a scoop him up, throw him in the car, you're on your way. So that'll come back into play later. At this point, the community was terrified. How could this have happened in this sleepy, friendly little military town? Every single sedan driver became a potential suspect. Cindy's sister Darlene and her mother actually moved into a trailer a few miles away from their old home, and Darlene was no longer allowed to venture too far from the trailer, which, like, good. That's terrifying. I wouldn't let my kid wander anywhere. I don't actually. I mean, call me paranoid, but I think I have good reason. So no children were walking the streets anymore. Parents were afraid to leave their children anywhere. This was all anyone could talk about. Citizens who didn't own a weapon went out and bought one, and some even took it upon themselves to go and look for the man in the sedan. But all were just dead ends, with the exception of one potential lead. A traveling salesman was going door to door that week that Cindy had gone missing, and he was doing something very odd. This man pulled out a girl's braided ponytail from his pocket. And this immediately alarmed those who witnessed it. Because, I mean, yeah, if I saw a guy going door to door as a salesman and he pulls a braided ponytail out of his pocket, what the fuck? Why do you have that? I mean, killer or not, you need to be looked into, sir. Why do you have that in your pocket? Now, despite their best efforts, this was ultimately another dead end. And as it turns out, the salesman had a rock solid alibi. I mean, as weird as it may seem, the hair was actually given to him by a girl. It was just given to him. I know. I'm just telling you the facts. So he had an alibi, and the little girl had given him her hair for whatever reason. So things were looking really bleak. There were no leads. Everyone had become paranoid for good reason, and the town was essentially on lockdown. However, on Sunday, May 7th, someone walked to the corner of North Carmichael and Brockbank Place, about 4 houses down from the police chief's home, and they dropped a piece of paper into a mailbox. On the paper was written, "To the Sierra Vista Police, I am the Phantom." So, yeah, this asshole gave himself a name. Anyways, the letter was handwritten and it continued, quote, "You have found my first victim. My next one lives on Stephen Street, a 9 years old girl. I don't live in Sierra Vista. Nobody knows where my hangout is. But one clue is where the sun sets the fastest, you shall see 3 trees. Sure, I'm an old man with gray hair, but you'll never find me. There's thousands of old men in Arizona that fit my description. Ha ha. But watch out." Then, again in larger letters, it repeated, quote, "My next victim lives on Stephen Street, 9 years old. Fools. Signed, the Phantom. Good luck." End quote. Clearly, he was taunting the police, like many other sociopaths have in the past. They have this awful sense of invincibility and enjoy being chased for whatever reason. And now he had given himself a name. As most of them believe about themselves, he didn't think he was going to get caught. So now the police went to Stephen Street and they started looking for anyone who matched the description of the next victim. And from that point on, those children were under constant supervision. Many of the girls who lived on this street were sent to live elsewhere with family or they got out of town somehow. The children of Sierra Vista knew something bad was happening. Even if the adults weren't forthcoming with what exactly that was, they could just tell something ominous was happening. So this murderous asshole ruined the lives of one family already and then stole the carefree innocence of every single other child in this town. He knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote that letter. So Cindy's sister, Darlene, she had already been affected by the murder of her sister, personally, emotionally, spiritually. And now, not only did she lose her little sister in the most brutal and awful way possible, but the news of all of this was isolating her from others. Friends no longer wanted to play with her. They avoided walking by her home. Parents would not allow playdates at all. Which, like, that's kind of shitty, right? A family lost their child. She lost her sister. It's not her fault. Like, maybe come together as a community and try to help them, Just it makes me so mad. Like, just that's not her fault. She's 12. Anyways, as the case went on, Reed Vance, he was a young chief of police at the time in Sierra Vista, and he was determined to solve this case. According to others on the force and in town, Vance was very intelligent. He had a good sense of humor. He was a very dedicated officer. He came off as very mellow and kind, but was also very tough. One member of the force described him as a bulldog. Like, he was like a dog with a bone. He couldn't stop until a case was solved, which that's good. But what can be kind of bad is when these police officers who are so dead set on solving cases are going to just go for anything. But that's not how Vance operated, thankfully. He was an officer who wanted solid evidence. So he couldn't just jump on any bandwagon he thought was going to solve the case. He wanted proof. Now, at the time, they didn't have access to criminal profilers or anything like that, but Vance did find a handwriting analyst and, and continued with attempting to analyze the letter for any useful clues. The results of the analyst suggested that they were looking for the wrong man, that they didn't need to be looking for an elderly man with gray hair at all, that they needed to be looking for a younger person, likely a teenage boy. The phrase, my hangout, referenced in the letter, was seen as a young person lingo, as well as the name the Phantom, which seemed like it was maybe something out of a comic book. Now, I know handwriting analysts, that's kind of one of those things that it's not always ideal. Like, in the JonBenet Ramsey case, it can get a little gray. However, in this case, it provided to be extremely helpful and accurate. I'm so sorry if you hear, like, shouting and screaming in the background. My kids are playing in the other room. So, if you hear that, I'm sorry. Just ignore it. So, Vance at this time decided he had to expand the range of potential suspects at this point. He decided that if this was the case, that, it was a younger person, he had a way to catch him. So, with the help of teachers and staff at the local high school, Vance instructed them to give every student the same essay assignment. Now, remember, this is a small town. Sierra Vista only has one high school. So all the teenagers, all of them go here. So the teachers and Vance decided that they would give the students an assignment to write about law enforcement. And police would then compare the essays to the killer's letter. He convinced the faculty that this was one of the best ways to catch this murderous pervert. And of course, the staff was on board. So as essays started rolling in, and they looked for words that were misspelled in similar ways and other patterns, but as time went on, it ultimately came to another dead end, and there was no useful information found. They were back to square one. Not only did their real suspect at the time, that ponytail toting weirdo salesman, he had an alibi, right? But the girl who gave him her hair, she was also very much alive. So that wasn't working out. They couldn't find any patterns in the letter that matched any student handwriting. And if that weren't bad enough, the only other solid lead, and I use that term loosely, was the one given by Cindy's 7-year-old friend who claimed she saw Cindy getting into the sedan with the older gentleman. Now, another child had even come forward and said, yeah, the sedan had stars on the bumper. But as it would turn out, this never happened. The children never saw Cindy getting into a sedan and actually had admitted that they lied. So, okay, this part really frustrated me. Now, I work with kids, I'm a teacher. Kids lie. They lie. But like, they lie about how many teeth they've lost or seeing the Loch Ness monster, trying to like one up their friends about how many pets they have. They don't lie about this stuff. Like, why lie about this? So, this just struck me as strange. Well, come to find out, the children had seen a stranger danger video at Carmichael Elementary School that spring, and the kidnapper in the video was an older man who drove a sedan with stars on it. So, yeah, they they really were just telling the adults what they wanted to hear. In their minds, they were probably trying to help. They figured, "Oh, that's what a kidnapper looks like in a video. That must be what they look like in real life." Right? So they thought they were helping. And as you can imagine, this really frustrated the officers and it set back the operation extensively because they had spent all this time, searching for this elderly man. And then they got the letter, and then the salesman didn't work out. Like, just nothing was coming together. At this point, the killer could be anybody, it could be anyone, they could be anywhere, they could have skipped town. They had no leads. So that evening, Chief Vance decided to drive the streets just to kind of clear his head and just look for anything, any little thing he could find. Now, keep in mind, an important aspect about this murder is there was no evidence of sexual assault. So this kind of ate away at Vance. It meant that something else was the driving factor. He didn't know what it was. Like, what was the motive? So as Vance was driving the streets of Sierra Vista, he came across a tall, thin teenager named William Huff. Vance knew William and he knew his past. When he saw William, Vance was suddenly flooded with an intuitive feeling to look into this boy. It was just a gut feeling based on previous issues with this teen, but he knew he had to be able to prove it. He wasn't just going to jump the gun. He had to have solid proof. But his gut was telling him something here has to do with what happened to Cindy. Now, I know seeing a teenager and thinking, "Oh, they killed this girl." Like, what the hell? Why would you just automatically assume a teenager was involved? So, keep in mind, most of the children in Sierra Vista, they knew each other. They knew of each other or they went to school with each other, and William Huff wasn't like a stranger. Everyone knew William's family. So, let's get into who William was and who his family was. Now, from the outside looking in, there was no indication of anything out of the ordinary with William. I mean, former classmates described him as, yeah, like a nice guy, said his family as a whole was really friendly and well liked in the community. His little brother actually had epilepsy, and others in the town knew this and would call for help when he had an episode. He was the subject of a lot of police calls because of the seizures he had, and so the town just kind of knew little brother needed some help sometimes. Now, unfortunately, unlike his little brother, William was the subject of other police calls that were not so great. And we'll get into those in a minute. But William and his family dynamics were pretty typical for the time and the place. William was one of 8 children. He didn't really get much attention from what I could find. It said that his mother ran a very clean home and a tight ship, and the attention he did get wasn't very warm. His father was a career soldier with an impeccable record, but according to William, his father, a sergeant, he was a strict disciplinarian and he had a temper. He often directed it at William with beatings and verbal abuse. And according to William, his father often called him awful things like ugly ass and big lips, which like why? Like why would you call your kid that? Why have kids if you're going to be mean to them? I will never understand. Now, I get it was the 60s, but like get it together. Now, there's no excuse for speaking that way to your children or physically disciplining them. These are just William's accounts of his own father. And we do need to remember, times were very different then. So if that's really how his father was and William is being truthful, that sucks. Now, that's really shitty. And I feel bad for him as a child. Now, at school, William mostly got C's, D's, and F's. I mean, he was a little below average, but he was at school when he needed to be. And some teachers described him as a loner, while others claimed that while he was superficially quiet and good natured looking, underneath was a kleptomaniac who needed constant supervision. Now, that's according to the teachers. But when his parents were asked, even they stated that, yeah, William is a klepto. He started stealing bikes when he was 8 years old. He just really got a thrill out of stealing things. And I mean, today we would probably help William, right? We take him to the pediatrician, get referrals for therapy, especially if you're military. I mean, I think it's practically free, isn't it, to get therapy from what I've heard? I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's fine. You can correct me. I don't care. But none of this was done for William. It was the 60s. So he just continued to push the limits in this small town and make a name for himself with the police. So he was stealing bikes and doing all kinds of, dumb shit that kids do. Maybe not all kids. I don't remember stealing bikes. That wasn't really a part of my childhood, but, to each their own. So he stole bikes. What was the thing though for Vance when he saw William walking? What was that light bulb moment that made him think that this 16-year-old could have committed this awful murder? Well, as I described before, Cindy Clellan's murder was very gruesome. And this struck a strong note of familiarity within Vance. As it turns out, the torture and mutilation of Cindy's body reminded Vance of an incident that had occurred at the Fort Huachuca Animal Sanctuary the previous year. So it turns out that Fort Huachuca used to have like a little zoo, like an animal rescue area for different types of animals. And this is really awful. If you're sensitive to animal cruelty, just I hate this too. I didn't want to include it, but it's super important to the case, so I decided it needed to be in here. Now, the incident that sparked Vance's light bulb moment was realizing that just the previous year, William Huff had broken into that animal sanctuary on the fort and had disemboweled geese and other animals. On more than one occasion, William had also been accused of putting kittens into milk cartons and stomping on them. So now Vance is thinking, huh, this kid disemboweled animals. He hurts animals for fun. And Cindy was also disemboweled, which, like, I can understand why you're making that connection. Disemboweling isn't really something you come across often, right? And when you have nothing to go off of, this would absolutely be something that would make you suspicious. Now, along with stealing and severe animal cruelty, William had also been a suspect in a series of break ins at his neighbor's house. And this happened recently, like right before Cindy had gone missing. William was accused of fondling his next door neighbor's daughter in the middle of the night after breaking into their home. At one point, he was actually found under the little girl's bed and then ran off after he realized he'd been caught. Another time, one of the younger daughters had been awoken in the night by a tall teenage boy standing over her, who she said lived next door. And William's older brother Charles later confirmed with journalist Morgan Loew from the podcast I mentioned at the top. He told Morgan Loew that William admitted he had done these things. He was never arrested because they couldn't prove he had been there. It was considered hearsay, and the police, back then, let's be honest, they really didn't take like things like that as seriously as we do now. Just kind of a slap on the wrist and don't do it again. And it probably was helpful to William that his father was super respected in the community due to his military standing. And I think in a lot of ways that protected William quite a bit. Even with the animal disembowelment on the fort, he was basically just told not to go on the base anymore. They were like, hey, you're suspended from the fort. You can't come up here. So it doesn't sound like any serious legal action was ever taken against William. And these days, we know a lot more about warning signs in children, and it would not be handled so flippantly. If somebody was disemboweling animals, we get them some psychological help, right? We would hope that you get your kids some help if they're disemboweling animals. Don't let them do that. That's not okay. That's a big red flag. So now Vance, when he saw William Huff that day, he immediately just started connecting all the dots with Cindy's murder. But he had no proof again. He was just kind of thinking this is intuitive. He feels like somehow William is involved. And he wasn't just going to go after William on a hunch. He was a kid. He was like, this is a kid. What would happen if I was wrong? He wanted to be sure before acting on any kind of impulse. Okay, so let's get back to William's father. A lot of things are happening in William's life. He's hurting animals, he's stealing bikes, he's breaking into neighbors' homes, and now let's talk about William's dad. As I stated before, he was a known disciplinarian and often used terrible language toward his son, according to William. Now, his brother Charles, I couldn't really find much from him about the dad, like anything from Charles about the dad, other than he was really well respected and their whole family was well respected. Now, if their father was truly as awful as William makes him to seem, that's terrible. But that being said, people have shitty childhoods all the time. It's awful. It's a travesty. I mean, I've seen how this type of parenting affects children firsthand in the classroom, and it absolutely breaks your heart. I know many amazing people who went through horrendous childhoods and I mean terrible, but they grow up and they never once hurt animals or children or anybody else for that matter. It's very easy to screw up a child's psyche, but it doesn't create a killer. It's much more complex than that. There have been many, many people with abusive parents and dysfunctional childhoods who don't go on to become monsters. But now William, at only 16 years old, already had a history of sociopathic behavior. He admitted to hurting animals as well as breaking into his neighbor's home and molesting her. Now, this would make even the most respectable, non judgmental person question your integrity and morality. Breaking into people's homes, hurting animals. People hear that, they're going to think you're an asshole and a danger to others. So Vance went ahead and mentioned his suspicions of William in the case to a coworker. At one point in the investigation, an officer from the Cochise County Sheriff's Department, who was in charge of giving assignments to investigators, he gave a very important assignment to an officer to go talk and interview not only William Huff, but his family. So this officer, he went and later came back and reported he had talked with them and learned nothing of value during his interview. But years later, the same officer admitted he never interviewed a single member of the Huff family or William Huff. Do you know why? He said he knew the family and he felt that there was just no reason to believe they would be involved, so he took it upon himself to ignore the assignment. I don't care if you think they're innocent or not. Go talk to them. Go ask them about their son. Go talk to the son. See what he was doing that day. It's your job. Just do your job. And Vance, Chief Vance, not knowing that the gentleman just mentioned didn't even interview the family, he still had no official suspects other than what his gut was telling him. So this would turn out to be extremely detrimental to the case and the community because not only 2 months after Cindy's death, another little girl in Sierra Vista would also go missing. Albert Haynes and his family moved back to Sierra Vista. Haynes had previously lived in Sierra Vista about 7 years prior, and since then they had lived all over the place, like Germany, Ethiopia, due to his military assignments. His daughter Janelle was 6 years old at the time when they moved back. She had actually been born in Sierra Vista when they last lived there. The Haynes family had 12 children and were happy to come home to Sierra Vista because it was like a homecoming. Melissa Haynes, a member of the family, said that the grandma was packing up the house, when they moved back. She thought it was safe for the kids to just go out and play because it was a military town and they'd lived there before. Now remember, they had just moved back, so they likely didn't know about the recent murder. And with 12 kids, I mean, especially in the 60s, I'm sure you just kind of let them go off and make their own fun. But just before noon, Janelle and her brother, who was 8, decided, okay, let's go down to the pond near the Lakeside Officers Club. Let's go hang out over there. And according to her brother, they were approached by a tall, thin, black teenage boy. The teenager said he knew where they could go find some tadpoles. And before her brother knew it, suddenly his sister and the teenager had just vanished. Now, who was this teenager? None other than William Huff. That same day, around 1:10 p.m., Chief Reed Vance was going to the post for one of his meetings, and he again spotted William walking like he was coming off of the fort, off of the post. He was walking along the highway road near Fort Huachuca, and this kind of struck Vance as odd because Huff wasn't allowed on the post since the animal sanctuary incident the previous year, right? Like I said, he'd been suspended. However, at this time, Vance was unaware that another little girl had gone missing, so he kept driving. And he knew he didn't have enough reason to question William, so, he just kind of went on. And it looked like William was heading off the post anyway, so he wasn't going to stop and bug him. At 2 p.m., Janelle's parents reported her missing. Immediately, Vance's suspicions grew. But the evidence was just circumstantial at best and wouldn't be enough to arrest William. Everyone was very tense at this time, very scared given the recent circumstances of Cindy's murder. So within an hour, a full search party was in the works. There were 40 soldiers, as well as citizens and soldiers on horseback. There were police officers, helicopters overhead, and even divers were getting ready to search the pond for Janelle. 150 additional soldiers were called in with a tracker to go search for Janelle. But that's when they made a horrifying discovery. Just like Cindy, they found Janelle's clothes on a nearby mesquite tree. And at 7:30, officers found Janelle's body face up on the desert floor, naked, just like Cindy. Her forehead had also been crushed by a rock, and she had been found about a mile away from the pond up on a hill. The same officer who brought Cindy's father to the scene of her crime also brought Janelle's father to the scene, Lieutenant Colonel Haynes. He asked to say goodbye to his daughter, and this poor father walked over to her body, said his goodbyes, and then just calmly walked away. I imagine he was just completely in shock. I don't even know how somebody could process that in the moment. It's just horrifying. Just how? How does somebody say, I'm going to hurt people and I'm going to hurt the most vulnerable of people? I'm going to hurt little kids. I don't get it. It just makes me freaking sick. It's disgusting. And Chief Vance felt the same way. And he was solidifying his suspicions of William. He didn't want to question another suspect at the time because his gut was telling him this is it. There were just unmistakable similarities in the murders. Neither of them were sexually assaulted. They both had their skulls crushed with a rock. Both were young girls around the same age. Both had their clothes removed. Both were found on Fort Huachuca, and their clothes were scattered across mesquite trees. There was only one difference in that one was disemboweled and one wasn't, but they were killed in the exact same way. But still, there was not enough to make this fit, and Vance had to convince everyone that they should take a second look at the handwriting samples from the high school. Upon looking further into the essays submitted by students, they realized William Huff hadn't even submitted an essay. He was absent that week. So now it's starting to make a little more sense for Vance. If they could somehow connect him with the letter, they could at least bring him in for sending a threat through the mail. So Vance went into the high school searching for writing samples that he could use from William. On the letter, the Phantom, the letter the Phantom had sent in, he spelt the word sheriff, Shiriff, on the outside of the letter. So finally, Vance stumbled across some of Huff's schoolwork where he had spelled it in the exact same way. This is when Vance moved in on the arrest. He said, this is what I got. This is what I'm going to go with. I'm going to give it a shot. And he actually got permission from the federal prosecutor in Tucson to authorize the arrest 1 week after Janelle Haynes' death. So when Vance and his team member went to the Huff home to make the arrest, William's mother was absolutely furious. She was cussing and hollering. I mean, I don't think we can blame her. That's her son. If somebody said your son had killed 2 little girls, I imagine most mothers wouldn't want to believe that, right? But 2 weeks later, Janelle Haynes' brother, who had been with her at the pond, he actually identified William from a yearbook. He said, "This is the boy who went with my sister." Now, this coupled with having evidence from the letter and William's past with the animal sanctuary, being near the scene of the crime, breaking and entering and, molesting girls or just like creeping them out and standing over them in the middle of the night. That was enough for a federal grand jury to indict William on charges of first-degree murder in the death of Janelle Haynes and sending a threat through the mail. Shortly after the arrest, William's father returned to Sierra Vista. He had been in California at the time where he was stationed, so he came back to visit his son. It said that he walked in to speak with William, and his father told him, if you did this, you need to own up to it. If you hurt these girls, you killed these girls, you better tell them the truth. And shortly after, William changed his plea to guilty to second-degree murder for the death of Janelle Haynes and guilty to second-degree murder for the death of Cindy Cleland. Huff was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison and 40 to life in state prison. So now that William had changed his plea, it was time for him to finally give us an answer. Why? Or what? What happened that day that little Cindy was killed? And why would a teenager who has his whole life ahead of him choose to commit such an awful crime? According to 16-year-old William, the day Cindy went missing, he was wandering around, which he did often, and he had gone to a teen club and got drunk. Which, they had teen clubs in the 60s in Sierra Vista? We didn't even have one of those. What is that? What's a teen club? So he went and he got drunk at a teen club that same day. And he also got into a fight with another little boy in the town because the boy called him the N-word. So remember, he's a black teenager in Sierra Vista. This boy called him the N-word. I think the fight was probably justified. That's just my personal opinion. don't use derogatory terms for people. Now, an officer saw the boys in a fight and broke them up. He asked William, "Hey, William, are you high?" And William said, "Yes." And then the officer just let him go home. William said as he walked home, he was very angry. He said he was just tired of the authority figures in town. He was tired of being treated like a criminal. And now, it's very likely that he probably felt targeted because of the color of his skin. William said he was tired of white people, accusing him of doing things. And it's very likely that racism existed in the 60s in Sierra Vista. It exists everywhere. I mean, our president's bestie just did a freaking Nazi salute. So is it really getting better? I can't say. But William felt that he was just done. He was done with all of it. But this does not excuse what he goes on to admit. William was in front of Meter's grocery store when he saw young Cindy Cleland. At only 4 feet tall and 60 pounds, Cindy was an easy target. William, who was 6'1" and 160 pounds, took his opportunity. He was angry and he wanted somebody to take it out on. And at the time, many people trusted their neighbors. Cindy had no reason to distrust William. She knew him. She was actually friends with his little brother. She had even been to his home before. Cindy had absolutely no reason to suspect any kind of danger from William. This was a boy she had known and been friendly with in the past. And this is when he told Cindy, "Hey, Cindy, I know a place where we could go see some rabbits." And he promised to take her to look for them. So he lured Cindy into the desert on Fort Huachuca to go find rabbits. And according to William, once he isolated Cindy, he began to remove her clothing. Cindy actually attempted to run away, but he threw a rock and struck her in the right temple. Now, this is likely what caused her to fall unconscious when he hit her in the temple with a rock. William could have just left at that point. He could have just said, oh my God, I need to leave. I need to go tell somebody what I did. But no. He then decided to strike her 4 more times in the head with the rock, and then he used a string to strangle her. It was then that this monster decided he hadn't done enough and somehow made an already awful scene worse. He found a broken piece of glass and began cutting into Cindy's body. According to the autopsy, there were 6 fan-shaped superficial cuts and a cut from the breastbone to the pelvis, and then a smaller cut that pierced her liver. Later on, when he realized the police had found her and they were looking for the suspect, he claimed he just panicked. And that's when he decided to write the letter in an attempt to kind of lead officials elsewhere. He had heard that Cindy's friend mentioned something about a man in a sedan, an elderly man, so he included that in the letter. However, when Vance and his team began combing through student work at the local high school, this sent William just spiraling into yet another scheme to lead police away from their suspicions. He was afraid he was going to be caught. And in his mind, the only way to get them off his tail was to commit another murder, apparently, hoping they would suspect a soldier or somebody else. After all, he hadn't submitted an essay, and so he thought this would throw them off. Which, are you serious? How shitty. He wanted someone else to go down for his crimes, and his only solution was to kill another little girl? I don't care how mad you are at the world. Killing an innocent child or anybody for that matter is disgusting and evil. And I'm shocked at his reasoning, the reasoning of this 16-year-old. You've got to be kidding me. So then what happened with Janelle Haynes? If he said that's what happened with Cindy, why did he target Janelle? According to William, on June 22nd, he left his home at 9 a.m. for the Social Security office to see if his card had arrived. He had ordered a Social Security card, I assume for work purposes. And as he was going to the office, he had an altercation with a police officer, which made him angry. I couldn't find any details about this altercation, just that an officer made him mad. So William decided he would take a bus to Fort Huachuca, where he wasn't even allowed to go. And he was hoping to play basketball in the gym when he got there. But when he got there, a judo class was happening in the gym. And this made him even more angry because How dare they do a class when he wants to play basketball? And this is where the logic of his messed up, twisted mind really gets dark once again. He walked toward a dry wash near the army post, just angry, thinking about, not being able to play basketball. He hated the authority figures in town. He spotted a young boy and girl playing near an empty pond. That was Janelle and her 8-year-old brother. So William asked them if they wanted to go see some tadpoles at a real pond. And that's when William decided this was going to be his next victim. So he lured Janelle to this pond, and her little brother just kind of looked around like, where did they go? He didn't know where to go, and they had just disappeared in a flash. Now, William says he didn't disembowel Janelle like he did Cindy because he claims he didn't even want to hurt Janelle, that he was just spiraling in shame. He said when he lured her to this pond, he hit her with a rock and just ran away because he was angry. Was like, that doesn't make any sense, William. How did her clothes get sprawled everywhere then? Seems to me like you had a plan and you wanted to hurt her. Journalist Morgan Loew actually has letters written from William Huff from prison. In his podcast, he reads them, and William claims that the cops never tried to look for the elderly man, and they were just busy trying to pin it on him, which we know isn't true. And Morgan Loew was like, I know the case. Just tell me why you did it. I'm just researching. I want to know why you did this. And Huff's tune immediately changed, and he responded that, he was just angry and he wanted to take it out on the white people in town. He claimed Cindy had happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong moment, but he admits to luring her and says he was trying to send a message of fear. In the letters, he goes on to say it was a feeling of power over life and retaliation against the white authorities. He says he was mad that the officer sent him home after that fight when he was drunk. So William said that the next day he felt horrible about what he'd done to Cindy as well because he really liked her family. He said the note was not a realistic threat and that the phantom was just from a comic book, which is exactly what the handwriting analyst had suggested. William goes on to say he doesn't remember what drove him to commit the second offense, just that he was trying to redirect the investigation. He said he didn't cut Janelle because he, quote, didn't even want to hurt her, end quote. He said he was scared to do it, and he just hit her and ran. William claims to have had an issue with authority figures, and the police just reminded him of his father. Huff said he has lived in shame and couldn't admit in front of the victims' families or even his own mother because he was just afraid. He claims now, he's going to religious services and that this has helped him change and he doesn't want to be called the Phantom any longer. That's just a short recap of what these letters included. I don't know how much of that is sincere in those letters, but the facts are that the summer of 1967 changed these families' lives forever. Darlene, Cindy's sister, still blames herself now for not letting her sister come with her to get her bike. And her relationship with her father, I guess, was just never the same after that, which, that's horrible. And the Haynes family, Janelle Haynes' family, they suffered a loss as well. Neither of these families got to see what their children could grow up to be. Sierra Vista had always been a quiet, friendly little town, and these murders just shook this small town in a way that nothing else ever had. No one felt safe anymore. It changed the community and the police department forever. David Santos, who was only 22 at the time of these murders, he was actually one of the people who was out helping to look for Cindy in the first murder when she went missing. And he said that this case is what made him want to become a cop. He said after all these years, all he's seen, other killings, murders that he's been involved with, nothing in over 50 years, nothing has been like this. He still gets really emotional talking about this case. It's awful. No one ever thought that William Huff was going to get out of prison. He was caught, he admitted it, he was there for life. But as our justice system tends to do, and like many of these stories go, they were wrong. Now, that's not to say they just like let him out immediately. William did spend 5 decades in prison. He had been an inmate for most of that time. He had a super short release from the federal prison in 1984, but was sent back less than a year later. And he was pretty mad about this because he got a taste of freedom and then was sent right back. Apparently, he was sent back because he was in Tucson at the time, living in Tucson during his release, and an 8-year-old girl was abducted and murdered. The little girl's name was Vicky Lynn Hoskinson. And since Huff was living in Tucson at the time, and he says, he wasn't involved, they even caught the man who did it, a man named Frank Jarvis Atwood. William Huff thinks that this is why he was sent back to prison, which, I don't know why. I have no idea. Maybe he was involved. Maybe he's not giving us the full story. We don't know. But what we do know is that he was sent back after less than a year of being released. So something must have happened. William has filed grievances saying he was sent back for no reason, and they didn't really give him a chance to explain anything. Which, like, I don't know. Maybe they don't want to listen to your explanation. William, you killed 2 little girls. I don't know. However, since he was sent back to prison for, 40 to life and not just a straightforward life sentence, he was actually allowed to have a hearing every 6 months. Obviously, for the families, this was awful, and they showed up to speak against William Huff. Every chance they could, every parole eligibility hearing, they were there. Cindy's older sister, Darlene, attended every hearing. She wanted answers. I think she wanted closure. Now, according to Darlene, at all of these hearings, she said William constantly played the victim, which, like, yeah, I'm not surprised. She said, quote, he would say it was Cindy's fault, it was the police's fault, or that he was on marijuana, he had been drinking, end quote. So it seems that, there was just always an excuse for William at these hearings. He never took responsibility for his actions. And this showed severe lack of remorse, which, in my experience, when I'm reading about parole hearings, if they're not showing any remorse for their actions and they're playing the victim, they're not going to let you go, dude. You're going to stay in there because you haven't learned anything. And I mean, personally, I don't think that if you murder somebody, you should be let out. I think you stay in there regardless because you took someone's life. So now yours should be spent behind bars. Now, Janelle's aunt, Melissa, this is her father's sister. She's been very outspoken about, fighting back with William in court and doing everything she could for the family. Darlene and Melissa have become very close, kind of like sisters, and they always talk after the parole hearings. They want to make sure that the other knows when the hearings will occur so they can be there. But parole was constantly denied for William. They were like, no, Mr. Huff, no parole for you. Sorry, not today, no parole. However, on December 2nd in 2015, Huff made another plea to the board. And no one really thought anything of this one, like, his parole hearings hadn't gone in his favor in the past. But as it would turn out, this hearing would be very different. According to Melissa, she heard the following from a clemency board member at his hearing. They said, quote, I think you have done enough to prove to society that you're ready to be released. End quote. The argument for this clemency board member was that, oh, William was just a teenager when he committed these offenses, and it gets harder as time goes on to keep an old inmate in jail due to their teenage actions. Which, like, I get that. I get he was a teenager when he did this, but he wasn't just sent to prison for stealing those bikes. The crimes he committed were horrendous. He disemboweled a child. You know what this reminds me of? Oh, what's his name? Joshua. This reminds me of the case of Maddie Clifton. If you guys don't know that case, I might cover it later on. That's a rough one too. But that boy who killed her, he was only 14 at the time when he did it, and he's still in jail. So, like, I'm sorry. If you're going to commit a very grown crime, you're going to do some very grown time. It's evil. It's awful. You took someone's life. Go away. So the clemency board member disagrees. They go on to say, quote, having a psychopathic personality does not mean you're going to be a criminal and continue to commit crimes, end quote. This woman who said that was going to make a motion to grant him home arrest. So she was like, "No, William should be on home arrest. It's fine." There's so many opinions. Everyone was really, really shocked when this woman said what she said and wanted to grant him home arrest. But on January 4th, 2016, 64-year-old William Huff was released to a halfway house in here in Tucson. And he moved 3 times in the course of 1 year while being required to wear an ankle monitor and check in with his parole officer regularly. And he was also required to get a job while on home arrest, which I don't really know how that works, but he had to get a job. Melissa and Darlene attempted to get the clemency board to reverse their decision. And now in 2017, some new board members agreed with them, thankfully. But before the vote, the board recessed and then met with their attorney and ultimately decided, nah, we're just going to leave Huff where he is because he hadn't violated the terms of his release. According to prison records, 3 independent prison psychologists have said that William is a sociopath with very little chance of reform. Which, like, I'm not a professional and I don't claim to be. I don't play one on TV or anything like that. But I trust these prison psychologists when they say somebody has little chance of reform. So, William Huff, after all of this, he's living in Tucson. He has his ankle monitor, all of that. He was tracked down by the news station, which I have kind of mixed feelings about, but they watched him as children just walked and played near him. And he just leisurely rode his bike. And people in the community were not notified when he moved in. He lived about a block and a half away from a boys and girls club. And some people were completely outraged by this. Hi, I would be one of those people too. Others said, the news was just fear mongering and that criminals won't always commit again, which that's also true. I get that. But if you have a right to know when a sex offender moves into your neighborhood, like you can look up or get alerts when they do. Why can't you get notified if a child murderer moves into your neighborhood? Like, Jesus, let that sink in for a minute. Can we make that make sense? Why? So there was actually a bill that they tried to pass to get murderers like Huff on registries, but the bill ultimately didn't pass. Now, David Santos, the man who said he became a cop because of the Cindy Clellan case, he was furious during all of this news, and he wrote letters pleading the clemency board to revisit. Now, in my personal opinion, these people on the board, they're not the ones to lift the lifeless body of a 7 and 6-year-old girl. One completely gutted. Like, they can never understand the severity of that scene. They were not there. And I mean, clearly, it doesn't sound like they care to try and put it into perspective. And it's not like Huff accidentally hurt somebody and they died. It's not like he hit somebody. He wasn't tossing rocks and playing and then hit someone and they got killed. That's not what happened. He lured little girls into the desert and murdered them. He disemboweled a child. He had a history of killing animals. He was not okay. He may have been 16, but he only stopped killing, I think, because he was caught. I mean, there's no little girls to murder in prison, so yeah, he's gonna behave himself. So once the story got out that William was living in Tucson and, you know, his past, uh, people reacted very negatively. There was hope that the board would revisit their decision, and that just never happened. But then, on November 5th, 2018, a surprise visit to William's apartment by his 2 parole officers made a very surprising discovery. When Huff exited the residence, he opened the door just barely enough to get himself through the doorway. Like, he cracked that door open and kind of squeezed his way through. And that's when the parole officers saw through the crack of the door, they saw an outline of a little girl sleeping on the floor. Now, this was just immediate violation of his parole. So they took him in. They said, "Nope, you have violated your parole. You're under arrest. You're going back." So this little girl was okay. She was alive. She was just sleeping on the floor. This was his fiance's 8-year-old niece. This man had a fiance. Now, I don't know if she knew his past, but this dude had an ankle monitor. And just like a quick Google search, you'd probably be able to figure out what he did, right? This is what, 2018. So yeah, you can easily figure out why your fiance has an ankle monitor. So maybe don't bring your 8-year-old niece there. 3 other adults were in the apartment along with Huff, and that includes the girl's parents. He says he was never alone with the girl. He's never going to do anything to her. Nonetheless, this was a violation of his parole and he was taken into custody. Huff's attorney said that, oh, well, he wasn't aware that he wasn't allowed to be near children. Like, how you could argue that, I have no idea. He killed little kids. He squeezed himself through that doorway because he knew he was gonna be in trouble. Why not just casually open the door and be like, "Hey, boys, nothing to see here," you know? No, he squeezed himself through the door. If he was really a changed man of God, remember how he said, "Oh, I started going to religious services and I don't wanna be the phantom. I'm a changed man." If he really found religion, tell your fiancée no. Tell her, "No, I can't have kids here. I will get in trouble. Do not bring your niece here." I'm not making any excuses for William. He can go back to prison for all I give. Like, I don't care. Go back to prison. I care about the kids in this case. I care about the victims. He committed horrendous crimes. I don't give a fuck what he says. Go back to prison. So Huff claims he had actually tried to contact his POs when he found out his fiance's family was coming to visit, but he was not able to contact them. And so he says this just wasn't fair to him. Which, again, like, which one is it, William? How can you say you didn't know you weren't allowed to be around kids and then say you tried to call the POs when you found out a child was coming to your home? So we don't know. To this day, was he testing his boundaries or was it a careless mistake? There's really no way of knowing if those parents knew of his offenses. I would think the fiance did. And like, why allow your niece to come there? I will never be able to wrap my head around it. Ladies, get it together. Find better partners. Do not try to fix men. Don't change them. They're not babies. They don't wear diapers. They don't need changing. Ugh. Anyways, I'm getting carried away. Later on, Charles Huff, which is William's older brother, he reached out to Morgan Loew saying that some people in the family, they don't think that William is so wonderful. They think William is very dangerous. Charles mentions the incident of the break-ins occurring before Cindy's death in 1967 and says the police should have taken fingerprints to prove it was William because William admitted it to him. So Charles wishes for his brother William to come clean and says that he doesn't think William should be released. He said, not unless he can be put into a program to help him adjust back into society. His brother says he views him as a serial killer, that he hates to admit it about his brother, but that's just what he is. I have not found any further information about William Huff. As far as I know, he's still incarcerated in Arizona for violating the terms of his release. And yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about this case. I have so many opinions. He was really upset about the way the police treated him, which, like, if they really, really wanted to, they could have just arrested him for the bikes. They could have arrested him for the animal disembowelment. They could have arrested him for getting into a fight when he was drunk or high or whatever. They never did. So, yeah. Sorry guys. This was a long one. This was a long episode and it was pretty rough. So, yeah, guys, that is the terrible, awful, true story of the murder of Cindy Clellan and Janelle Haynes, who were just taken way too soon. I hope that, the families have found some sense of peace, and I'm glad that Melissa and Darlene continued to fight all these years for those girls. Ugh, I'm sorry, this was a really long episode. I didn't expect it to be this long. So if you're still here, hey, thanks for listening. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. I would love to hear your thoughts about the case. If you have any feedback for me, you have story suggestions stories you want me to cover, or even corrections for me. If you know about this and you're like, hey, you got this part wrong, just send it to me. I'm open to criticism. You can send it to me at suspectsandspiritspod@gmail.com. That email is also in my Instagram bio. So you can just go to the Instagram page for the podcast and there'll be an option to email me. You can just do it from there. Yeah. Thank you guys for listening. All of you who made it here. Thank you. Thank you. And remember, trust your intuition. Listen to your lizard brain, trust your lizard brain because it's usually right. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. I don't really know how to end this, so bye. I'll see you guys next time. Well, I won't see you. You'll be listening to me. Whatever. You get it. Until next time. Goodbye.